we all will remember, or was it Willimantic? Who knows? Anyhow, it was the night of the big game, the big football game, and so nobody came to the show.
Yeah, that's bad scheduling.
Yeah.
In 2007, the world held its breath when The Police, reunited after more than 2 decades apart. The stage lights burned bright, the crowd roared, and 3 legendary musicians stepped into the spotlight again. But backstage, a storm was brewing. Stewart Copeland, the fierce, unpredictable heartbeat of the band, had spent years biting his tongue. That silence ended today. What he revealed shocked fans and pulled the curtain back on a darker side of Sting, the golden boy who'd become a global icon. This wasn't just another story of rock star egos clashing. Copeland didn't just talk about artistic disagreements. He finally exposed the toxic power dynamics, the manipulation, the buried resentments, and the years of personal betrayal that tore one of rock's most iconic bands apart from the inside. Think of the Police at their peak in the early 18s, sleek, sharp, and unstoppable. But behind the glitter of Grammy Awards and sold-out tours, the band was held together with duct tape and disdain. Sting, with his undeniable talent and movie star looks, slowly took over the creative reins. What started as a band of equals quickly turned into a one-man show. During the sessions for their final studio album, Synchronicity, tensions exploded. Copeland and Sting clashed so violently that physical fights erupted in the studio. Engineers often had to separate them. Andy Summers, the quiet guitarist, often found himself in the role of reluctant mediator, trapped between 2 alpha males with boiling tempers. By the end, Sting refused to play songs he didn't write. He dismissed Copeland's rhythmic ideas and openly rolled his eyes at Summers' suggestions. The band may have been climbing charts, but their relationships were crashing hard. Copeland described the experience as emotional torture, and now he's finally explaining why. When Sting launched his solo career in 1985, he didn't look back. To outsiders, it looked like a natural evolution. To those close to the band, it was betrayal. The Police were still one of the biggest bands on the planet, but Sting had outgrown them, or so he thought. He surrounded himself with jazz musicians, distanced himself from the punk reggae roots that had defined their sound, and subtly erased the contributions of the band that made him a star. Copeland was devastated, not just by the breakup, but by how coldly it was handled. There was no farewell tour, no heartfelt goodbye, just silence. Sting had shut the door and walked away, leaving the others in emotional limbo. And worse, he went on to rewrite history in interviews, downplaying the role of his bandmates and portraying himself as the tortured genius who carried the group.
And we did this last year, as a matter of fact. We took a long break, and everyone said the band's breaking up and everything. But 2 weeks later, I get a call from Andy, and Andy gets Sting gets a call from me, and
Years passed. Then came the reunion. Fans were ecstatic, but inside the band, nothing had changed. Sting was still in charge, dictating set lists, arrangements, and even tempos. Copeland chafed under the pressure. He joked about it in interviews, but the bitterness was real. During rehearsals, arguments resurfaced. The chemistry on stage was electric, but it masked a battlefield of unresolved resentment. Copeland has now revealed that the reunion was emotionally brutal. Sting had grown even more distant, almost robotic in his approach to music. The spontaneity was gone, replaced by a perfectionism that strangled the joy out of their performances. Copeland felt like a session drummer in his own band, and today he finally admitted it was the last straw. But the chaos didn't end with the Police. Sting's career has been marked by a long trail of broken alliances, bruised egos, and rivalries that extended far beyond his own band. As his fame grew, so did his reputation for being cold, calculating, and often arrogant. In the jazz and classical scenes he tried to enter post-Police, Sting quickly clashed with established musicians who accused him of using their genres to serve his own brand, not their art. He feuded with legendary conductor Sir John Eliot Gardiner after a disastrous attempt at a classical crossover, and jazz trumpeter Wynton Marsalis once publicly criticized Sting for being all style, no soul. Even Elton John reportedly distanced himself after a backstage argument over Sting's aloof behavior during a charity event. And then there were the Hollywood feuds. During the making of the 1984 film Dune, where Sting played Feyd-Rautha, tensions on set were high. Crew members described him as distant and difficult, while co-stars were frustrated by his lack of acting discipline. Though he dipped in and out of film, his relationships with directors and actors never lasted long. Even his collaborations in the late 1990s and 2000s, from Bryan Adams to Sheryl Crow, were marked by behind-the-scenes tension. Many artists who once admired him began to avoid working with him, whispering about his controlling tendencies and icy temperament. Away from the spotlight, Sting's personal life has been far from the polished image he projects. Born Gordon Sumner, he grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Wallsend, England. His early years were marked by a strained relationship with his father, a shipyard engineer who disapproved of his musical dreams. This childhood friction would shape Sting's intense need for control and his lifelong difficulty with authority and emotional intimacy. His first marriage to actress Frances Tumulty collapsed in a cloud of scandal. While still married, Sting began an affair with Frances's close friend, Trudy Styler. The betrayal made headlines across the UK, especially since the two women had worked together in theater. The media frenzy was relentless, and Sting was vilified in the tabloids. Friends were lost, and relationships were shattered. Eventually, Sting married Trudy, but even that relationship was steeped in controversy. They projected an image of spiritual balance and tantric harmony, but insiders painted a different picture of power games, jealousy, and long separations due to Sting's career. Rumors of flirtations, near breakups, and emotional distance followed the couple for years. And then there were the struggles with his own identity. Despite his confident public persona, Sting often battled self-doubt and internal conflict. Friends from the early Police days claimed he struggled with intense mood swings and paranoia, fueled by fame, creative frustration, and the pressure to reinvent himself constantly. In interviews, Sting often hinted at emotional trauma and obsessive control issues. His perfectionism, which served him in music, often damaged his personal relationships. Bandmates, friends, and even family members eventually learned to tiptoe around him, afraid of triggering his unpredictable temper. Despite his wealth and acclaim, he often lived like a man haunted by guilt, by rivalry, and by the ghosts of people he'd left behind. In more recent years, as Sting moved deeper into activism and spiritual pursuits, cracks began to show in the immaculate image he so carefully built. His ventures into yoga and environmentalism earned praise but also suspicion. Critics accused him of preaching virtue while living in mansions and jetting across the globe. He spoke of simplicity but lived with excess. Those who once admired his spiritual discipline began to question whether it was genuine enlightenment or just another mask. His attempts to reinvent himself through causes and consciousness often rang hollow for those who knew him behind the scenes. While he gave speeches on saving the rainforest and healing the soul, he reportedly alienated even more collaborators and associates through increasingly rigid standards and emotional coldness. As his public image softened, his private world narrowed. Even his children, whom he claimed he would not leave a fortune to in order to teach them independence, felt the pressure of growing up in the shadow of a man worshipped and feared. Some struggled with identity and addiction, quietly battling demons their father never publicly acknowledged. Despite their privileges, they inherited not just Sting's name, but also the emotional weight of his legend. Meanwhile, those who had been closest to Sting, former bandmates, colleagues, even crew members, described a man increasingly isolated by his own ego. He sought silence and solitude, but many wondered if it was peace he was chasing or an escape from the wreckage of bridges burned long ago. Friends drifted away, collaborators disappeared. In the echo of applause, Sting stood increasingly alone. Today, as Stewart Copeland finally breaks the silence, fans are left to reconsider the legacy of the man behind the music. Sting, the icon. Sting, the genius. And now, Sting, the man at war with the world and with himself. A towering figure in music whose brilliance may always be tangled with pain, and whose legacy, no matter how celebrated, will never be free of shadows. Sting's story is one of paradox, of brilliance entangled with bitterness, and legacy shaped as much by conflict as by creativity. He soared to the heights of international stardom, yet the path he carved was littered with scorched earth and broken trust. His name will always stand tall among rock's elite, but the question now lingers: at what cost? For every anthem that defined a generation, there was an argument behind closed doors. For every standing ovation, there was a silent fallout with someone who helped build that success. Behind every glossy magazine cover, there was another wounded relationship left behind, quietly collapsing under the weight of Sting's perfectionism and emotional distance. As Copeland lifts the veil, fans are invited not just to remember the music, but to confront the man behind it. Flawed, wounded, brilliant, and alone. He was the architect of unforgettable songs, but also the engineer of his own isolation. For decades, the world saw the mystique, the discipline, the spiritual calm. Few saw the restlessness, the control, the endless need to prove himself, not to fans, but to his own inner critic. The myth is shattered. What remains is the raw, complicated truth of a man who climbed to the top and paid for it with his peace. Fame gave him the world, but it also took parts of his soul he may never reclaim. And perhaps, in the end, that's the true price of greatness: to give everything you have, only to find yourself left with echoes of applause and a silence that no audience can fill.